about you, but there is one thing you have allowed me to get acquainted with, and that is your neglect as a child. What made you feel that you were neglected as a child?
Let me first begin by saying that it was a sense of nostalgia and honor that I faced this gathering to share with you this experience of things of neglect. In response to your question, I would say one of the things that was a marked experience that gave me an indication that they were neglecting my family is the fact that there seemed to be an insufficiency of things in my home. And more than that, there was always a question of when would my father be at home. There was never sufficient money, there was never sufficient food, there was never sufficient social interaction in terms of the family. There was more of a struggle, and there was an anticipation of some kind of fear that would have taken us as a family. So those and other things give me a clear indication that there was some kind of, some things that were absent in our family. I must indicate that as I grew, maybe then, if I were to walk back almost 40 years ago, I would not truly understand that this might have been neglect. But as I grew and as I ran into the issues of life as they pertain to family dynamics, I began realizing, and that's why I can probably say without the shadow of a doubt, that there certainly was some sort of neglect in our home, especially as it had to do with the absence of my father.
So there was no constant communication between you and your dad at any time?
Limited, I would say. And I would say limited because I will not be able to avoid comparing and contrasting the families around as it relates to what was happening to our family. There seemed to have been in other families the presence of a father all the time. But in our home, my little brother would say, Daddy would come home in the next red moon.
In the next?
Red moon. And that meant he probably would not come home because there weren't any red moons.
Okay, so how did you relate to that neglect?
Well, in terms of how I related to that neglect, I had some serious questions in my mind. And I think my overall approach to life was kind of challenging, especially for my mother, because there was always this attitude in my life that said, I'm going to have to fight for everything. I'm going to have to struggle. I'm going to have to, really get down to the grind of life. And as a result of that, I began doing certain things that were very questionable, not necessarily dangerous, but it indicated that I was going down a path that was not going to be particularly enriching for me. And so I made decisions that were not consistent with what life would allow me to turn out in terms of being the kind of person that every average person would want to be. I began associating with persons that could have led me off the path of life. So these and some other things are indicators that I really, the way I responded to some of these things. I got myself into bad company sometimes.
Don't let me go to short, but how old were you then?
I would say a consciousness of the whole experience as I look back in retrospect. I would want to think that maybe I was just about 9 years, 9 to 10, 11, thereabout. And what was more pronounced in my experience is that between that period of time, I had the unfortunate opportunity to see my father leave. Yeah, that was a marked experience. And I began thinking, how did I contribute to my father leaving home? And there was a struggle between himself and my mom. And one of the great things about my father, even though I understand his actions to be those that of neglect, I never saw him in any particular way raise his hand against my mother. And, but the struggle was there. And there was always this back and forth. And, it was really not very pleasant in terms of how I felt about the whole thing.
Well, can you just tell us how you really felt as a little boy, just watching your dad walk out of the home? Out of your mother's life? You needed a father then.
At that point in time, I began feeling like a lone ranger. I began feeling that there was going to be a world that is disconnected from me. I began feeling more and more that I will have to struggle, I will have to face the heat of the day to survive. I began feeling that, maybe I was not meant to be. I began feeling that people didn't want me, And I had this deep feeling of hurt on the inside as to all that was going on in my life, and in particular in the life of our family. There seemed to have been, however, the ability with my other brothers to deal with that kind of situation. But for me, it was a terrible situation. I don't know how they dealt with it, but for me it was really hurt. It was really a deep hurt.
How many siblings have you?
I have 4 other brothers, except for the other 2 that my father eventually introduced us to several years ago after he left.
I mean, it's hard to reconcile all that, you know, you were so young and you were going through so much. It must have been really painful. Did you really sleep well during that period?
Sleeping well. Sleeping well. I don't consciously remember what sleep was like, but I think I did sleep. And I guess at that point in time, you would not have been old enough to understand the impact of neglect. Because more or less, in spite of what was available for us, you had a sense that things were provided for you, and you did not necessarily have to go and find the things. So I guess I would not have probably understood it all. I probably would not have.
Did your mom ever talk to you about, negatively about your dad? Did she ever say anything to you about?
And she did not have to say much. It was obvious to us. However, in my mother's experience, she always seemed to have kept a balance in things. She never talked too much about our father's absence and seeming negligence. But you would know when it really got to her grit. You would know it. And I think that at a very early age, I had the opportunity of taking time out to observe my mother. And I must probably say that it was seen in all of the through of life. I seem to have been the one closest, though I think that I was the one that was suffering painfully from the blow. I saw my mother's countenance when it was perplexed. I saw her experiences when it was difficult. And somehow I think that I was drawn to her to associate with her in her struggles. And in the difficulty of life in terms of the struggle of providing for the family, I've seen my mother do all sorts of things together through 4 of us. At one time it was doing coconuts and copra and oil and taking care of pigs. It was selling cloth. It was planting spring onions. It was going to the market at 4 o'clock in the morning, staying up until about 2 o'clock getting ready the products to go to the market. It was the pain of wondering if she'd be early, because if she missed the first period of market, then she might have missed most of her customer. So it was seriously a rush and a hurry, because there were not sufficient hands to deal with the volume of stuff that she wanted to do, because in her mind she had already calculated how much profits she wanted to make so that she can keep her family going through. So those are some of the dynamics that we face at home. And in the context of my relationship with her, I think that though maybe not understanding it all, I kind of share in the deep pains of my mother, and somehow there was within my experience the ability to associate with her. And now I'm thinking about it and wondering if those were my ways of trying to empathize with her and to share her burdens and to walk the walk with her and to make sure that she had that kind of support.
You found a niche in your mother's arms. This was your comfort zone. But how did you relate to your parents then?
I had some good buddies and some bad ones. The good ones, I treated them well. The bad ones, I conquered them. Yeah. Some people referred to me back then as being a bad guy. I think I was just too energetic for a lot of stuff. And because of the amount of energy that I had, there were some people who just could not control me. But I had a passion to defend myself. I felt that I was going to be all alone, and I'm going to make sure that I'm going to guard my turf. Nobody's going to penetrate me very easily. To the extent that I remember one day I was at school, and there were 2 brothers. One of them were in the same class with me, and I think the guy was getting a little too obnoxious for me. He wanted to embarrass me, and my mother taught me not to allow people to embarrass you once you're doing something that is good. And I must indicate that in spite of the struggles, my mother took time off to really instill values in our lives that would guide us. So understanding it now to mean that those were the props that would make themselves available to us when we had to make certain kinds of decisions. But back to the story of the 2 guys. While we were in the classroom, I told the guy, I'm going to fix you up. And he became afraid, so he went to his higher form to inform his elder brother that he was in trouble with me and he needed his brother's assistant to take care of me. And after the bell rang, I boldly confronted them and gave both of them a flogging. And my elder brother was standing there and he was laughing how powerful I was, you know. And when I got home, he gave me this big bowl of porridge to congratulate me for being able to take care of myself.
So what you're telling us this afternoon is you became a man before you became a boy. I mean, before you went through your journey of innocence.
Yes.
Did that neglect cause you to exhibit antisocial behavior?
Well, I think that it did in some ways. Because of the loneliness, I think that there were times when I did not integrate properly with people. Because of this fear that there was not going to be sufficient, I am now beginning to understand that those kinds of things could have caused me to suffer from low self-esteem. And of course, low self-esteem would have its own impact on the life of an individual. And I can reasonably calculate that in some ways, in some measure, I might have suffered from the impact of those things. And as a result, I was not always proper in my deportment in terms of my relationship with others. But I think I had a loving heart, and a lot of people did not discover that.
The loving heart was you were fighting your way through life.
Well,
How could you reconcile that?
Not necessarily fighting with others, but in the sense that I saw myself as a helpful person, a person who could be there, and a person who meant well. But I think in it all, I would guard my turf. That was very special for me. Very, very special. So these are some of the things that happened to me. I also think that in it all, there was a sense of, there was a kind of pressure on me. Because after a while, I think my mom began depending upon me to the extent that I would probably feel that it was too much on me. And I guess after my first brother left, the pressure intensified in terms of how you dealt with family issues, in terms of the responsibility, because my mom was never there. She was always out. One of the great things, however, in that experience is the fact that she was organized. She was organized when it came to making sure that things happened at home. So we had what was called rotational duties, where 1 week it would be me in the kitchen and my brother in the yard taking care of the water fetching and the cows and other stuff in the yard, cleaning up the yard. And so my mother was a decent woman. My next brother would be responsible for the bedroom and the sitting room, and somebody else would be responsible for something. And when the next week came, I rolled into the bedroom, my other brother would roll from downstairs into the kitchen. And so in that way, I think my mother was able to manage family life to that extent. And one of the tremendous things that came out of that experience is the fact that I have learned to work in all the departments of a home, so I cannot be easily fooled with inconsistencies in the home.
Yes. Pastor Mariah, I'm listening to you attentively, and I'm hearing you saying that your dad was never home.
And you never had that experience of spending quality time with your dad. And I'm listening further, and I'm hearing you saying that your mom was never there. I mean, how did you,
Okay, well, I won't want to say totally that my father was not there. And you could, the fact is, you could not be sure when he was going to be there.
Okay.
You could not be sure. And so, I guess after a while, we learned not to live with too much of a high expectation of his arrival. And oftentimes, his presence came to us as a surprise when we got up the next morning. And, but he did some things. I just think that my dad had his priorities mixed up. And I can't be certain about how he was socialized, even though I have tried to make inquiry of his brothers and others who associated with him as to how he was socialized. Because for me, I wanted to know what kind of life my father lived, and to be able to draw from his experience those things that were meaningful. But I remember some of the things that he did that were very nice. He worked 150 miles away from home, and that would indicate that it was not in St.Lucia. So he worked 150 miles away from home, and somehow it got to me that maybe that was one of the reasons why he was never at home. But whenever he would come home, in those days there were no cell phones, there was what is called a telegram. My mom would receive a telegram, and the telegram would say, "Send Dalston and Ricky to town to meet me." And at 5 o'clock in the morning, my mom would put me on this bus that is called Chacha bus. And Chacha would take us and drop us off at this specific street in the city. And moments after, my father would just show up surprisingly. And as if in that moment, I forgot all my cares because I was in the presence of the most important person that I think that should have been a part of my life. And he would do some nice things to us. He would do things like put us on one side of the road by the curb, the zebra crossing, and he would teach us how to cross the road in the busy traffic. He would go on the other side and he would say, meaning look right, look left, look right again, and then he would do that, and then we would come across. And that was an amazing experience because upon returning home, I would boast to my friends that I knew how to cross the road properly. One other thing that he would have done is that he would have taken us to the restaurants, and he would make us choose what kind of food we would need. And at that moment, probably unconsciously sensing that this was going to be a food moment that I was not particularly going to be accustomed to, I better dive in.
That's interesting.
You know?
But we will now take a break.
Mr. Brian, and when we come back, you will tell me about how it was when you started dating.
Oh.
Knowing that, life has not been very good and now you're ready to fall in love. Did you at any time?
I kind of like how you like my story. I kind of like how you like it, especially this part. Let me begin by saying that it's interesting how that aspect of my life got into becoming developed. I began realizing that I began gravitating towards guys that were just older than myself. And I began sensing very early that I was introduced into a world that was very exciting. And I think as I reflect on it, I began to realize that maybe my oxytocin was kind of working very early. My mother always had a challenge. I don't want to call it a problem, but always call it, I think it is a challenge. And I guess from the way how she was brought up, she wanted to make sure that she protected me from the danger of getting involved with the opposite sex. But I had this habit from very, very early in my school life of writing love letters to those who I think that I really love. So eventually I was referred to by my mom as the love letter writer. And she would always say, somehow I was not good at hiding these letters, so she would find them in my bags, my school bag at the bottom of my bag where I hid them. She had this way of lifting up the bottom, the card at the bottom, and would find the letters there. And I remember she told me one day, you wait until your daddy come home. I'm going to tell him what you've been doing. And surprising to me, one day after a period between the blue moon and the red moon, when my father showed up, she offered a letter to my father with much anger. Because as far as she was concerned, I'm sending you to school, what are you doing with this kind of attitude? And my father picked up the letter, and he read through the letter, and he laughed, and tapped me on my shoulder and said, my boy. To the disgust of my mother. And then afterward, they went into the bedroom for a retreat, and I guess they dealt with that there. But my mother was never, she never had a problem with that. But let me just talk a little about this matter of my courtship days. I remember I began gravitating towards these bigger boys in the community. And it was like every Friday night, they would have this, Friday nights, or Thursday night, they would have this session where they would prepare in terms of what they're going to say to girls when they go to parties Friday night. And there was this guy by the name of Joe White. He had this book, this exercise book, with scores of these love verses, and the guys would gather together, and I would be on the outskirts of the group, and I would be hearing them until after a while, I began repeating some of them, and they integrated me. So I used to say things like, apples are fine, flowers are mine, girl, if you love me, make up your mind.
But let me ask you a question. This is quite interesting. And I know you're a married man. Do you still use
And
them?
those days, mind you, the girls love to hear those kind of stuff.
Yes.
So I had about 14 imaginary girlfriends.
Tell me, during that period of time, were you searching for love, knowing that there was a deficiency in the home? Were you on a journey, knowing and understanding that, I mean, mom really doesn't have time because she's always at work, and dad is always out there doing his own thing, and you're just this little boy growing up? I mean, no wonder you wrote so many letters. Was it a journey of discovery? Discovering yourself as a young man, searching for love. Was it all about that then?
I guess it was just the romantic part of me emerging at that particular time.
How old were you then?
I guess I was just about 12, 13 there now.
Oh.
You know, just about that. I think I just got an early exposure to life.
Did you really understand what you were doing then at 12?
No, I don't think I did understand
It's
what
just
I
the
was
roses
doing.
then?
I just thought that those guys were my heroes and I was following them. But the question that you asked with regards to how did I feel in terms of what did you say? In terms of how did I relate as I moved towards this experience? Was it love that I was searching for?
Were you searching for love?
I don't know if I can say that I was searching for love. I think I was more or less, as I analyzed the whole thing, I think I was just looking for acceptance. I think acceptance was my challenge there. Because I have come to learn that without that acceptance, that element of acceptance in a person's life, you run the risk of malfunctioning. And somehow it got to me that if I couldn't get recognition in a certain place, then I've got to do certain things to get that recognition. And I guess in my day and time, people were very kind to have been able to identify that this guy needed some recognition, and they would put me on the spot. I discovered as I grew up and I began understanding more in life, that I discovered as I analyzed my past that I was more or less a powerful, sanguine person. So I would walk into a situation and readily I'd be ready to go, you know. And I remember at one point in time, as a little boy, I was selected by my teacher to be the talker of a particular situation. And that gave me a sense of belonging, and I felt love for those kinds of things. Everyone that did kind things to me, I felt loved, and I got attached to these kinds of people. You know, I began feeling that these people were not going to hurt me. They were going to be there for me. They even contributed financially sometimes to my well-being, and I would ever be grateful to these kinds of persons.
Are you still in love with that teacher?
Yes. Yes.
Is she still alive?
Yes, 1,000,000 times I love her, and she's still alive.
I know. Well, we will take a short break right now.
Sure.
And when we come back, you'll tell us more about your story.
Sure.
I just love your story.
Yeah.
Love letters. Did you feel at one point in time that this was not necessary? And can you just tell me why?
I'm not sure that I can answer that question the way that probably there's a need for it to be answered. Or why did I have to fight? I guess there are some things in life you just don't understand them as they impact you from day to day. But I think in it all, somehow it resonated with me at that very tender age that I was going to have to face the whistle. I would have to learn to stand on my own. And I think I draw that kind of attitude from my mom. My mom was a real powerful woman. She was going to get it done no matter what. And I guess in my association I learned not only to fight physically, but to go after the things that I needed in life. And so I think that out of it, I learned a sense of independence very early. Go get it for yourself. Because if you're going to get it, you're going to have to fight for it. You're going to have to work for it. So very early, I began doing certain things that I learned. I began doing certain things that I learned from my mom, such as taking care of myself. And I guess in it all, my mom also introduced me to certain basic values in life very early. I was age 9 when I cooked my first pot of rice. Not everybody enjoyed it, but I don't cook those kinds of rice again. At 9, I was washing my own on the jockey. My mom would be washing on that side with this big container, and she would give me a little small one with some water and some powdered soap inside, and she would throw those little pieces of clothing to me, and she would say, wash. And while she is washing, I'll be washing, and then she would say, throw it at me. And she would check it in her own unique way. She would lift it up and smell a certain part of the underclothes, and if it was still smelling, she would toss it back at me and say, it's not yet done, son. And doing that was just game. It was just a joy. It was game for me. It was playing.
Right, you enjoyed
you know.
it. Mm-hmm.
But I eventually grew to understand that that was my initiation into joyful work. So I learned very early that work is not a burden, should not be a burden. I learned to enjoy work.
Okay.
Because it brought me a certain kind of satisfaction when she said, good boy, you did it well.
All right.
You know, good boy, you did it well. You know, and sometimes she would even congratulate me for things. I guess it was just the effort and not the product of what I did, because I think that it was not all perfect and well up to her standard. But she understood how to treat people and how to give them the gauge in life. And I guess those were some of the things that were marvelous in this whole experience of neglect. And I want to recognize that while life might have started out bad, I've learned that all things still work together for good. You know? And it's not how you got started, it's how you finish that really matters in life. You may have bad starts, but that's not the end. And I learned from a number of important persons around me, that if you keep the struggle, your better days are still ahead. I also learned that nothing comes easy. You got to work for what you want. You got to work hard. Nothing is natural. You know, everything you got to go after. And I learned also that success in life is 2% inspiration and 98% perspiration. You got to get up and go.
So then, whilst you were going through the pain, there was a certain amount of pleasure that you were also enjoying, because you were discovering yourself. And whilst you were discovering yourself, you were also realizing that in spite of everything else, when it comes to whatever your father did, his absence from the home, you still enjoyed a measure of hope. Is there something significant that brought along that kind of hope to you as a young man?
I think other than my mother, there were other support systems around that I see that are particularly absent in our family life and our social encounters. I lived in a particular setting, a family setting. So on that side there was Uncle Arthur, on that side there was Uncle Adolphus, on that side there was Uncle Joe, on the middle of them there was Aunt Lillian, at the back there was another uncle of mine, and then there was Aunt Maud, and a number of them. And we grew up in a situation where you were responsible to everybody, and everybody was going to take care of you. So if you misbehave, you're going to be disciplined by anybody here, because we're looking out for you. If you gain any kind of success, we're going to cheer you along. So there were these kinds of support structures that were there. And particularly, I learned discipline from Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe was a disciplinarian, and I guess it was because of his policing vocation. He was the first black assistant commissioner of police. And when he retired, he had this boys club and girls club, and you had to attend. And I learned discipline from him. You got to do the right thing or you'll be called upon.
So there was this significant person in your life,
yeah, there was some
who
significant
actually tried to pull the rope back, in
That's
spite of
right.
the fact that you were getting loose.
That's right.
But he was the one, so he was a significant person in your life.
Definitely.
Is he still alive?
No, he died several years ago.
Sorry to hear.
And one of the great things is that I had the opportunity to be there at the very closing moments of his life. And I was able to do some special things for him, which he was very appreciative about. And a week or so before he died, he sent me a note indicating how appreciated he was
wonderful.
for me being there for him when everybody else was gone. But I'd like to talk about Uncle Adolphus.
That's wonderful. But we'll
He-
have to wait a little longer. When
That's
we come
fine.
back, we'll continue the story.
Thanks. Thanks.
brothers in your environment who actually help your mom take care of you. And this is something we really lack in society. I wish we had it that way. You know, that's the way it was a long time ago. And I can testify to the fact that that's how it was before in my lifetime when I was growing up in my community. But tell me about your uncle. You said you died, you spoke to him, and you showed him appreciation for what he did. And that's wonderful. But since your dad was missing, can you just tell me what about your uncle you admired the most as a man?
For Uncle Joe, he was forthright with everything. But he was kind, because I remember once, at a particular time in the experience of the club, there would be the athletic sports. And of course, he had some kids overseas who would send barrels and so forth for him. And they would come as, lots of them, we found gifts in those barrels for the athletic sports. And I remember very, very clearly, and amazingly so too, because I was at the point where I needed a shoe to go to school. The one that I had, it really looked like crab was playing with it. It really bit it up, you know. And I remember in the athletic sports, this race that I was supposed to run, my uncle made sure that I got in first to the tape, because that shoe was going to be the prize. So what he did, he placed all the other guys who could run faster than me behind me and gave me so much distance in front of them, you know, so that when the whistle went, man, and my little feet begin to give the fire, they couldn't catch me. And I was ever grateful when the gifts, the prizes were given out. I didn't really know that this shoe was the first prize, but he set it up so nicely, you know. And when I opened the box, I saw this wonderful looking shoe that I've never seen in my life. And I was ever grateful for him. But I wanted to talk a little about this significant other uncle, apart from Uncle Arthur, who was a counselor of the family. Anything that went wrong in the family, he would come as a counselor and make sure that things were reconciled in the family. And he is not leaving until mommy and daddy kiss, or brother and sister hug, and that kind of thing. Then he would leave. But Uncle Adolphus was quite an interesting man. At the end of the year, we would have what is called family reunion, and it would take the form of a party. So on Christmas Day, there would be party for the kids, and on New Year's Day, there would be party for the elderly folk, and then, well, All Year's Day, and then New Year's Day, there would be family party for everyone. So wherever the members of the family were scattered, everybody came back for that grand occasion. And he had this disco. Well, it was kind of open disco. We don't call them disco again because, you know, you don't have an open disco. But on the floor of the disco, he drew circles and he wrote the names of the songs in the circle with the person who sang the song. And each family member, each family had to choose one of these circles as their favorite song. And what would happen is that the music would play and everybody in the circle would dance with each other. So by that you would know I came from a dancing culture. So they would dance, and then there was this one song that would be sung all together, that would be played all together, and it was a song that allowed for every family member to leave their circle and to build this bigger family circle. And everybody would dance with a little. If you were in the circle, I would dance with you a little. Then you would dance with somebody else, and I would move and dance until everybody had a chance to dance with everybody. And then it came to the moment when it was the blessing moment, because he functioned as the priest of the family. So he had this large container of Johnson baby powder. And what he would do, he would now come into the circle dressed like a priest. And he would shake some powder on you and say, that's the blessing for the new year. That's the blessing for the new year. Until everybody, everyone was powdered. And then there was this big dancing in powder. You know, whatever wrongs were done were reconciled there. And it was a brand new start. So I guess all of those things helped to inculcate in me a certain kind of understanding of life, though I didn't understand it then. Now I'm looking back and I'm investigating my life, and I'm sensing that there were some great things that happened to me.
Yeah.
Especially as it had to do with these support systems that were around me at that point in time.
Well, I'm glad for you that you are able to smile now. It's not just about pain. I always say to my friends, life is a bitter, sweet romance. You know, sometimes you know, according to the song. Sometimes I'm sad and sometimes I'm happy. Sometimes I'm up and sometimes I'm down, and that's what life is all about.
Mrs. Emmanuel, if I were the host, I'd ask you to tell me about that story.
Some other time, some other time. But tell me, you are now a pastor, a minister of religion. How did you get there?
I guess it's an interesting journey back in time, and to think about it gives me a sense of nostalgia. Because when I look back, I remember one day, I began assessing myself at that very moment, and I began realizing that some of my classmates were not as bright as I am, but my mom couldn't provide for me to go to school. And something was awakened in me that said to me, you're going to have to get on in life. I'd failed all my CXCs except 2, and one of them was English. And I guess the only reason why I passed that subject is because the pastor paid for that subject, so it was holy money, so God had to make me pass. You know? But it goes back to the time when I remember this day I was sitting in the garden, I was working in the garden with my mom, and I saw this aircraft passing. And I began dreaming that one of these days, I'm going to be in the belly of that vehicle. And I'll be going to some place where I'm going to have my dreams realized. Because by then, all my other friends had gone off to Cuba, had gone off to the United States of America, gone off to Canada. And somewhere in my mind, those guys were not as smart as I am. You know? And every day I would be there taking care of the cattle, the cows. And I began sensing that this is not where I'm going to be. I don't want to spend my life, not that I thought that it was a terrible thing to do, but I began sensing somehow that life had more to offer than just this. So I began dreaming and I began praying about this whole thing. And one of the great things that I did is that this helpfulness that I developed in childhood, I took it over into my religious experience of the church. So I remember one day, one of the things that I loved doing was that when nobody wanted to take care of the church, I'll take care of it. Because I learned that if you did what God said, if you do God's work, God will give you His pay. So when nobody wanted to stay back and close up the church windows and clean up the church and fix things back, I will do that after service. And then I had this elder of mine, a few years ago he died, who very early in my experience of the church spotted an ability in me to preach. And what he would do, he would come to church without notifying me, pull me in the vestry, and he would say, you got to preach today, you know. And I would say, how could you do that to me? He said, man, don't worry, you have the thing. Come. He would pull the text and he would say, read this text, read this passage of scripture and make that point. You're going to make 3 points, huh? Make that one, make that one, make that one. Go and pray and you come back. And while you're preaching, I will sit next to you. And if you miss a text, I'll count it to you. And you just pick it up and preach. You know? And in reflection, I begin realizing those sermons, you only preach them once. They were some of the best proclamations that I've ever had. And then after a while, folks began saying to me, you have a special calling, and it's time you show up for ministry. By that time, some of my relatives, I had a very good cousin of mine who was assistant brigadier in the army in the Guyana Defense Force. And I did not know another uncle of mine were planning to get me incorporated to do the officers cadet training program to become a lieutenant in the army. And then one day, while I was in the funeral, I sensed that I was getting close to this opportunity. And then somebody had died in the church. Prominent Sabbath school superintendent, a lady who was responsible for certain aspects of the church. And the elder came to me surprisingly and he said, you're not preaching today. This is a big shot funeral. The president is going to preach. But I want you to pray at the end. And I want you to pray so well. So I got into the mood of praying and he sat in the front seat of the church. And when it was my time to pray, he just turned to me and he did. And he just sat back. And he began looking at me at the corner of my eyes. And I got up and prayed a prayer. And when it was finished, it must have been a good prayer because I heard everybody say amen. And then he looked at me and he did, and smiled at me. Then after the funeral, I continued, I did exactly what I used to do, fix up. And in the process of fixing up, I saw this handsome, well-dressed American Negro walking down the aisles coming my direction. And he said to me, what are you doing with your education? And I began telling him these sad stories. Pushed his hand in his pocket and he pulled out his wallet and he handed me a card. And he said to me, when you get all your prerequisites to get to college, I know you don't have money. You just call me on this number and I'm going to give you a full amount of enough money for you to go to school for 1 year. And depending on what you do, I'm going to take you through this.
What I'm hearing you saying right now is you were determined to succeed.
Definitely.
You were not just determined to succeed. You took heed to the amount of help and the kind of help you were given as a young man. In fact, you took the bull by, you held the bull by the horn, as most persons say, and you tried to make something significant of yourself. You also had a dream, and you kept on dreaming, as you said, when you saw the aircraft flying. You always dreamt of flying in one of the aircrafts one day, and I guess that really happened one day. You left your country,
yes,
and you were able to go out to another country to excel yourself. That means you kept on dreaming. This is one thing that we all have to do. If you don't have a dream, then you better
but that's
just
what,
forget about
that's
it.
what makes life
So,
grow. You've got to have a dream.
yes. So
if
right
you don't have a dream, you're going to be left behind.
That's very
The
important.
faster you get a dream, the better it's going to be for you. And the
Yes.
thing about it is that some people will not believe in your dream.
No.
But it's your dream.
It's yours.
You've got to believe in it when nobody else believes in it.
I like that.
If you are warm and hot about what providence or whatever is placed within your mind, that's your dream, and you got to go after it with the tenacity of a bulldog, and don't let anybody keep you.
I love to hear that, but right now we have to stop. When we start all over again, we will give the audience a few minutes to ask some pertinent questions.
Sure.
Would you like that? You have been a wonderful audience, and we're back. Pastor Morian is ready to answer your questions. As I said previously, we have a group of experts who are also very eager to answer your questions. So at this time, if there is anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question, we are at your disposal. Thank you.
Good day. My question is, what are the factors that may cause parents to neglect their children?
I think I want to surrender to the expert.
Mr. Eugene, would you like to answer this question?
There are a number of factors that may cause parents to be neglectful. I think the economy is one of those broad factors, because as Pastor Morian spoke earlier, he spoke about his mother doing everything she could have done to provide for her family. And neglect is not intentional most times, but it is a means to an end, if we can put it like that. You know, trying to get to the market, trying to get things prepared, trying to put things, you know, together for the family, resulted probably by the mother. But you spoke mostly about your father, the father neglect towards you, and there may be many reasons why male, the masculine person, genes would you know, respond in the way that they do. If we look at our history as black people, as far back as slavery, you can see the pattern, you know, of fathers and the way that they, you know, looked after their family. They were just the reproduction. They just reproduced, and the females were the one who took care of the family and you know, do those kinds of things. And that pattern came down with us, you know, and in the family, it has always been the mothers being the strong ones. Always been the mothers being the strong one. And one of the things I didn't hear you speak about at all is your relationship, your father's relationship with his father. You spoke about the females in the family, you know, but then there was not much that you said about your father's father and you know, that male line there, you know.
If you will allow, you just triggered something in my mind that I think I want to respond to, because in my profession as family life helper, you know, it has come to my mind that maybe one of the challenges that we face as male is that we have not been allowed, or we have not been taught how to operate within the dynamics of total lifelong commitment. And I think as I survey the experience of the family, I'm discovering that when you do not teach a child to complete an assignment, it logs into his mind that assignments are not to be completed. And they carry that attitude over in life. And where commitment is supposed to be demonstrated, they don't demonstrate it because they didn't learn it. It has not become a fixed point in their minds. And they accept that as a part of life. And I think that spills over into family life. And when you think about the patriarchal approach to life, in that setting, people, as I've come to understand it and study it, in that context, the man was just responsible for making kids, or at least impregnating a woman, and he was supposed to find the means whereby they would survive. So the woman was responsible for making sure that the emotional aspect of the child was fulfilled. And I guess that is a serious, serious fallout in family. When a woman is pregnant, a man is pregnant too. But regards to my father's father, he was gone a long time. I never heard about him, except en passant.
Well, now we'll entertain another question. Is there anyone with another question?
Pastor, you said that at a certain point in your life you did some investigating. I'd like to ask you this two-part question. Do you know how your father was raised? And if so, do you think this is why he neglected you?
Upon reflection, I lived with my grandmother for a while. That is the mother of my father. I lived with her for a while. And upon reflection, I am not sure that I can categorically say that my father grew up in a dysfunctional home. I think my grandmother was a kind woman. She was a loving woman. In fact, of my other brothers, I was the one that lived with her in old age for some period of time. I don't think her judgments were always correct. She was a strong-headed woman, very, very strong-headed woman. And I guess these were some of the things that probably contributed to how my father eventually became. Because I remember she was the kind of person, if she was convinced about something that you had done and you did not do it, you would never be able to change your mind. And she had this attitude of harboring bitterness in her spirit. I say that with no intention to offend. But as I reflect on it, I'm wondering, how did my father survive in a situation like that? And what were some of the impact that a situation like that could have had on his life? And I guess, as I think about our experience, I must say that in some parts of my grandmother's life, it seemed as though she was not always there for my father and his other two brothers. She was not always there. And so I guess my father did not have the opportunity of having those essential values inculcated in his life that would probably give him a better opportunity to have a greater life. But nonetheless, I think that she had done sufficiently, as it was reflected in his life, that he had learned at least somehow to be a nice person. He was really a nice person in so many ways, but I think he didn't get it right.
We have a handsome gentleman at the back there who wants to ask a question. You can go ahead.
Yes, question to Pastor. Pastor, despite the pains of neglect, right? See, now that you're a man of God and you bring out good tidings and you might be preaching to people who's going through the same neglect and everything. How does that neglect contribute to the positivity you're bringing out there to people who are going through the same thing?
One of the things that it does for me is that It stops me from being critical about people who, you know, it helps me to appreciate people for who they are and to love people in spite of who they are. And it's something that I'm learning to do deliberately and intentional, because leave it to my emotions, I won't do that. How do I know that the person that lives next door to me, that young man, has not gone through or is not going through the same thing? And I often think when I meet people, I start off with the fundamental question of what really is going on in this person's life. Could it be? And I think I want to live my life for the goodwill of all men. Whatever I can do to help a person, I want to be able to do it. Because in life, is not what you acquire, is what you leave behind. And I want to leave that kind of legacy, that my attitude was towards helping as best as I can to help another person to get up the rough side of the mountain and to get to the top and to be able to write their name in the rainbow and to write it brightly in the colors thereof. Thank you.
It has been wonderful having you on the show, Pastor Morian.
My pleasure.
It was wonderful having you here. We have had a great audience. Put your hands together for yourself.
I think they were very kind.
Let me just tell you, it's time to wrap up. But the next time you come back to enjoy some time with Family Reflections, let me tell you, we are going to have an even better time, because the next topic is Pebbles in My Shoes, how to survive in critical times. See you next time on Family Reflections. God bless you. See you next time.